Welcome in. Today, we're taking a closer look at a Washington quarter that seems ordinary at first, but reveals some fascinating clues when you know exactly what to examine. First coin. The 1776 1970 Washington Bicentennial Quarter looks familiar enough to disappear into the background of American pocket change. Yet this particular coin carries one of the most unusual stories ever placed on a U.S. quarter. Its dual date connects the founding era of the United States with the nation's 200th anniversary, while the reverse replaces the traditional eagle with a dramatic colonial drummer preparing to beat a rhythm of celebration. But beneath that patriotic design is a much more complicated collecting story. More than 860 million copper-nickel-clad examples were struck at the Denver Mint, meaning that simply finding a 1776 1976 quarter with a small d does not make it rare. In fact, most circulated examples remain modest-value coins. The real intrigue begins when condition, strike quality, die characteristics, varieties, and authentication enter the picture. Some extraordinary examples have brought thousands of dollars, but those results belong to coins that are exceptionally preserved or carry a recognized variety, not to every bicentennial quarter pulled from a drawer. Later, we will examine what authenticated examples have actually sold for, why a spectacular auction result can be completely different from the value of an ordinary specimen, and which characteristics professional collectors examine before assigning serious value. The story begins several years before the coin reached American pockets. The United States was preparing for the 200th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and the celebration called for something more significant than ordinary commemorative souvenirs. Congress authorized special circulating designs for the quarter, half-dollar, and dollar, creating a rare situation in which everyday American money would temporarily carry imagery specifically associated with the bicentennial. The quarter became the most widely encountered of the three denominations, and its production stretched across 1975 and 1976, so that enormous quantities could enter circulation before and during the anniversary year. The unusual 1776 1976 date was therefore intentional, not an error. Denver produced the copper-nickel-clad version with the D mint mark, while Philadelphia struck the corresponding coins without a mint mark, and San Francisco produced collector versions, including clad and 40% silver issues. The Denver coin became especially abundant because demand for circulating bicentennial quarters was enormous. PCGS records the Denver clad mintage at 860,118,839 pieces, a figure that immediately explains why the normal coin is not scarce. Yet mintage alone never tells the entire story in numismatics. Millions can be struck, while relatively few survive in truly superior condition, and that difference between quantity produced and quality preserved is where the collector value story becomes much more interesting. Technically, the 1776 1976 bicentennial quarter is a copper-nickel-clad coin built around a pure copper center. Its outer layers contain 75% copper and 25% nickel, giving the coin the familiar silvery appearance associated with U.S.-clad quarters of the era, while the exposed edge can reveal the copper-colored core between the outer layers. The standard specifications are approximately 24.3 millimeters in diameter and 5.67 grams in weight, with a reeded edge. Those measurements are more than trivia for an experienced collector because they provide an important first line of defense against altered or counterfeit pieces. A genuine coin should fall within reasonable tolerances for its denomination, and a suspiciously light, heavy, undersized, or oversized specimen deserves closer examination rather than an immediate assumption that it is rare. The obverse continued the familiar Washington portrait originally designed by John Flanagan, while the reverse was redesigned for the bicentennial by Jack L.R. The Denver D is the mint mark that identifies the production facility, and its presence should be evaluated alongside the overall design rather than treated as a rarity marker by itself. This distinction is crucial because internet listings frequently present ordinary bicentennial quarters as scarce simply because they have a mint mark, unusual coloration, or an apparently imperfect detail. On a serious collector's scale, however, genuine rarity requires evidence, not appearance alone. Reverse is where the coin becomes immediately recognizable. Instead of the conventional eagle associated with Washington quarters, ours design places a colonial drummer prominently in the center, surrounded by 13 stars representing the original colonies. The inscriptions United States of America and quarter dollar frame the scene, while the dual date 1776-1976 anchors the design to the bicentennial celebration. The image was intended to evoke the atmosphere of the Revolutionary era, transforming a denomination used every day into a miniature historical monument. That historical association also explains why so many people saved these coins when they were released. Families placed rolls into drawers, children collected them from circulation, and countless Americans set aside pieces as souvenirs of the anniversary. This mass saving created an unusual contradiction. The coin became historically important and emotionally popular without becoming inherently rare. Large numbers survived because people anticipated that a bicentennial coin might someday become valuable. In many cases, that preservation actually worked against scarcity. The survival population of ordinary circulated and lower-grade uncirculated pieces is substantial, and modern collectors can still encounter them without extraordinary effort. The challenge is finding one that escaped the scratches, contact marks, weak strikes, discoloration, and storage damage that accumulated on so many others. That is why a coin that looks old is not necessarily scarce, and a bright-looking coin is not automatically rare. Professional grading separates those impressions from measurable condition. For the ordinary 1776-1970 quarter, collector value begins from a surprisingly modest foundation. NGC's current guide places circulated examples broadly around the 50-cent to $1.50 range, illustrating how little the dual date and bicentennial design alone add to a normal worn specimen. Even an attractive uncirculated coin may command only a relatively small premium unless its grade becomes exceptional. This is where collectors need to resist the temptation to confuse asking prices with realized prices. An online seller can list an ordinary coin for $2,000, $5,000 or more, but that does not establish that the coin is actually worth anything close to that amount. A documented transaction involving an authenticated coin is much more meaningful. At the upper end of the normal regular strike population, PCGS records an auction result of $6,463 for a 1976 D-clad quarter graded MS-68, sold through Heritage Auctions in January 2017. That is a remarkable result, but it represents an elite condition rarity rather than the typical market value of a Denver bicentennial quarter. A collector examining a coin that appears brilliant should therefore ask a different question, not does this look valuable, but how close is this coin to the finest known examples, and can its condition be independently verified? That change in perspective is fundamental to understanding why some apparently identical coins occupy completely different levels of the market. Condition becomes especially important once a coin enters the mint state grades. A circulated quarter can show friction on Washington's portrait, flattening on the drummer, rim wear, and contact marks acquired through years of handling. A mint state coin, by contrast, must show no evidence of circulation, but that does not mean every uncirculated example is equally desirable. MS-60 can describe a technically uncirculated coin with substantial marks, while MS-63, MS-64, MS-65, and higher grades progressively demand stronger preservation and overall eye appeal. At the finest levels, tiny imperfections that would be irrelevant on a circulated quarter can determine whether a coin receives one grade or another. Strike quality matters too. A coin can remain technically uncirculated while displaying softness in portions of the design because of die pressure, planchet characteristics, or production conditions. Collectors also pay attention to luster, surface preservation, color, and the balance of marks across the fields and devices. Color classification becomes particularly interesting with clad coins because exposure to environmental conditions can produce attractive toning, dull gray surfaces, golden hues, or darker discoloration. Attractive natural toning may appeal to some collectors, while artificial-looking color can reduce confidence and marketability. Ultimately, the highest premiums tend to concentrate in coins where exceptional preservation is combined with strong eye appeal, solid certification, and a population rarity that demonstrates how difficult the grade is to reproduce. Then there is the category that can completely change the conversation: recognized die varieties and genuine mint errors. The 1976 Bicentennial Quarter is particularly notable because specialists have identified a double die obverse variety, commonly catalogued as FS101. This is not simply a coin where letters look slightly blurry or doubled because of wear, photography, damage, or machine doubling. A true double die originates during the die-making process and produces characteristic separation or distortion in specific design elements. The distinction is critical because the market can place a substantial premium on a confirmed variety while ignoring a similar-looking but meaningless irregularity. PCGS records an auction result of $8,400 for a 1976 DFS1 double die obverse graded MS66 in 2023. Another authenticated example in AU55 sold for $474.99, demonstrating how dramatically grade can affect the market even within the same recognized variety. These numbers also show why a collector should never apply the value of a famous variety to an ordinary coin that merely appears unusual. A legitimate double die needs to match established diagnostics and ideally be examined by a knowledgeable specialist or professional grading service. Other errors, including dramatic off-center strikes, wrong planchets, clipped planchets, broad strikes, and major die breaks, can also be collectible when they are genuine, but minor rim irregularities, plating discoloration, scratches, and postmint damage should not automatically be promoted as valuable errors. Authentication is therefore one of the most important steps before assigning a serious value to any supposedly rare 1776 1976 D quarter. Start with the basic physical characteristics: diameter, weight, edge construction, design details, and mint mark placement. Then examine the coin under magnification without attempting to clean, polish, scrape, or chemically treat it. Cleaning can permanently damage the surfaces and may make an otherwise desirable coin less attractive to collectors. For a suspected double die, compare the relevant lettering and design areas with trusted variety references rather than relying on a photograph from a social media post. For an alleged major mint error, look for physical evidence consistent with how U.S. mint striking equipment actually works. Counterfeits and altered coins are uncommon compared with the enormous number of genuine bicentennial quarters, but valuable coins naturally attract more attempts at deception. Professional certification from organizations such as PCGS or NGC can provide an additional layer of confidence because the coin is examined, attributed when appropriate, encapsulated, and recorded under an identification number. This becomes especially important when the claimed value moves into the hundreds or thousands of dollars. A raw coin advertised for $3,200 is not automatically a $3,200 coin simply because the seller says it is rare. A certified example with a recognized variety, verified grade, and documented market history is an entirely different proposition. Preservation also plays a surprisingly large role in the story of this coin because the bicentennial quarter was saved in enormous numbers, yet relatively few pieces survived without meaningful surface problems. If a collector discovers an unusually clean example, the safest approach is to leave the original surfaces untouched. Fingerprints contain oils and contaminants that can affect metal over time, so handling should be limited and preferably done by the edges. Storage should protect the coin from moisture, harsh chemicals, PVC-containing materials, excessive heat, and uncontrolled environmental exposure. A proper archival holder or certified slab is generally preferable to loose storage in a drawer or pocket. Collectors should also understand that brilliant appearance is not enough to establish rarity. A freshly polished quarter may shine more dramatically than an untouched mint-state coin while being far less desirable. Natural tunning, original luster, and surface integrity are judged together. If a coin is being considered for professional grading, documenting its condition before submission can also be useful, particularly when a valuable variety is suspected. For a normal circulated Denver Bicentennial Quarter, expensive certification may not make financial sense. But for an exceptional specimen, suspected FS101 double die, or major authenticated error, professional examination can be essential. The goal is not simply to place a coin in plastic, it is to establish an objective record of what the coin actually is. The auction history of the 1776 1970 quarter reveals the most important lesson of all. Rarity is often found in combinations rather than in the date itself. The regular Denver issue had a mintage of 860,118,839, yet the finest surviving coins can command significant premiums because condition rarity is very different from mintage rarity. The MS-68 regular strike auction record of $6,463 demonstrates that an enormous mintage does not prevent an exceptional specimen from becoming scarce at the highest grade. Meanwhile, the FS101 double die has produced an even stronger result, with the documented $8,400 MS-66 auction record showing how attribution can transform the market profile of a coin. These extraordinary results should never be interpreted as evidence that every 1976 Bicentennial Quarter is worth thousands. Most are not. A normal circulated example may remain around face value or only slightly above it, while a conventional uncirculated specimen may bring a modest premium. A superb certified coin might reach hundreds, and a truly exceptional top-grade example or recognized variety can move into the thousands. The market is ultimately driven by competition among collectors, and that competition becomes intense when multiple buyers want the same rare combination of grade, variety, originality, and eye appeal. Auction records are therefore best understood as evidence of what the market has paid for specific coins under specific circumstances, not as universal price tags. What makes the 1776 1970 Washington Bicentennial Quarter so compelling is that it demonstrates almost every principle that makes American coin collecting fascinating. The coin is historically significant because it commemorated 2 centuries of American independence, technically interesting because of its clad construction and specialized bicentennial design, widely available because of its enormous production, and potentially valuable when exceptional preservation or a recognized variety separates one example from hundreds of millions of ordinary pieces. The most important discovery may therefore not be a mythical fortune hiding in every old coin jar, but the ability to recognize what genuinely deserves a closer look. Check the mint mark, examine the surfaces, study the strike, verify the weight and dimensions, learn the diagnostics of established varieties, and treat dramatic online claims with skepticism until they are supported by credible evidence. If a coin appears to be an FS101 double die, a major mint error, or an unusually high-grade survivor, professional authentication can determine whether the unusual appearance has real numismatic significance. And when the evidence is there, the difference can be extraordinary. A coin that began life as a quarter can become a 4-figure collectible because rarity, preservation, attribution, and demand have converged in a single piece. That is the real story of the 1776 1970 Bicentennial Quarter. Not that every example is valuable, but that among an enormous population, the right combination of characteristics can create a coin the market treats very differently from the rest. Next coin. The 1967 Washington Quarter is one of those coins that can look almost ordinary until the details begin to tell a very different story. It was born during one of the most important transitions in modern American coinage, when the United States was struggling with a severe coin shortage, and the familiar silver composition of circulating quarters had already disappeared. More than a billion Washington quarters were produced for 1967, yet the finest surviving examples can be surprisingly difficult to locate, creating a fascinating divide between abundance and condition rarity. There is another detail that makes this issue especially interesting. Unlike quarters from many other years, the 1967 circulation strike carries no mint mark. Even though production was divided among multiple United States mint facilities, that absence was deliberate and connected to the government's effort to discourage coin collecting during the shortage. As we follow this quarter from the pressure of the 1960s economy into the modern collector market, the important question is not simply whether a 1967 quarter is old. It is whether a particular example possesses the combination of originality, preservation, strike quality, rarity, and authentication that serious collectors compete to obtain. By the later stages of this story, the difference between an ordinary survivor and an elite certified example becomes unmistakable, and documented auction results reveal just how dramatically that difference can affect collector value. To understand why the 1967 quarter exists in its particular form, you have to step into the economic uncertainty of the mid-1960s. American commerce was consuming coins at an extraordinary rate, while silver prices were rising, and the intrinsic value of silver coins was becoming an increasing concern for the Treasury. The United States Mint responded by changing the composition of the dime and quarter beginning in 1965, replacing the traditional 90% silver alloy with copper-nickel-clad metal surrounding a pure copper core. The transition did not immediately solve the nation's shortage of small-denomination coins. By 1967, demand was so intense that the mint produced an extraordinary volume of circulating coinage, with total fractional output reaching roughly 7.22 billion pieces. Washington quarters alone accounted for 1,524,031,848 circulation strikes that year. Production was divided among Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, with Philadelphia responsible for 873,524,000 pieces, Denver for 632,767,848, and San Francisco for 17,740,000. Yet none of those circulating quarters received a mint mark. The decision was intentional. Officials wanted to discourage the public from removing coins from circulation simply because they came from a particular mint facility. For collectors today, this creates an unusual situation in which a 1967 quarter struck in Philadelphia cannot be distinguished by mint mark from one struck at Denver or San Francisco merely by looking at the finished coin. That missing letter is therefore not an omission caused by a striking mistake. It is part of the historical story of the issue itself. Physically, the 1967 Washington quarter follows the new clad standard established during the coinage transition. It weighs approximately 5.67 grams, measures 24.3 millimeters across, and has a reeded edge. Its outer layers are composed of an alloy containing 75% copper and 25% nickel, bonded over a pure copper center. That construction gives the coin its characteristic silvery appearance while allowing a copper-colored line to be visible around the edge, where the inner core can be seen. These specifications are extremely useful when evaluating a suspicious coin because a claimed rarity should first behave like the genuine object it is supposed to be. A significant deviation in weight, diameter, edge appearance, or metal structure can justify closer investigation, although small differences can occur through normal manufacturing tolerances and wear. The obverse carries John Flanagan's classic portrait of George Washington, facing left, surrounded by liberty, in God We Trust, and the date 1967. The reverse retains Flanagan's adaptation of the great seal-inspired eagle design used on Washington quarters, with the eagle beneath United States of America and above $quarter, accompanied by the inscription EPLURIBUS UNUM. Compared with later commemorative quarters, there is no special artwork announcing an anniversary or event, But the coin itself represents an important turning point. Washington's familiar portrait had entered the post-silver era of American circulating money. Its metal, weight, and construction therefore document a major change in the nation's monetary system. The absence of a mint mark becomes even more significant when the production process is examined closely. During this period, the mint was under enormous pressure to manufacture enough coins for commerce, and the priority was volume rather than creating pieces specifically intended for collectors. The 1967 quarter was struck from clad planchets, which required properly bonded layers of copper, nickel, and copper to withstand the tremendous force of the coining presses. After blank preparation and upsetting, planchets were fed into presses where dies imparted the Washington portrait and eagle reverse. Because the production environment emphasized speed and quantity, individual coins could emerge with differences in strike sharpness, luster, contact marks, planchet quality, and surface preservation. Those differences matter enormously today. A quarter could leave the mint without ever being circulated and still acquire marks from contact with other coins during manufacturing, transportation, bagging, or storage. In addition, 1967 occupies an unusual place in U.S. mint history because regular annual uncirculated mint sets were not produced that year. Instead, the mint offered special mint sets, creating a separate collector category that can easily be confused with ordinary business strikes. The special mint set coins were specially prepared and often display more reflective, carefully finished surfaces than ordinary circulation strikes. That distinction is crucial because a beautiful 1967 quarter is not automatically a business strike, and a coin that looks proof-like under certain lighting may actually belong to the SMS category. Professional attribution can therefore change not only the description of a coin, but also the entire market against which it should be evaluated. That distinction between circulation strikes and special mint set pieces opens one of the most intriguing chapters in the 1967 quarter story. Approximately 1.8 million 1967 quarters were produced for the special mint set program, a tiny figure compared with the more than 1.5 billion regular circulation strikes. SMS coins were not conventional proofs, but they received special handling and finishing that can produce surfaces with a noticeably different character. Some examples have brilliant, reflective fields and frosted design elements, while particularly impressive pieces may receive CAM or DCAM designations when the contrast between the fields and devices is strong enough. For collectors, that visual separation can create an entirely different level of desirability. PCGS recognizes regular 1967 quarters separately from SMS pieces and records distinct populations, varieties, and auction histories for them. This is where a collector examining a supposedly valuable 1967 quarter needs to slow down. A reflective surface does not automatically prove that a coin is a proof, and a normal circulation strike should not be valued using the market for a specially prepared SMS piece. At the highest levels, tiny differences in surface texture, frost, reflectivity, and strike characteristics become important. The most desirable examples can possess exceptional eye appeal while also carrying a grade that demonstrates how few comparable coins have survived. A coin might therefore have the same date, the same Washington portrait, the same composition, and the same absence of a mint mark as another piece, yet belong to a completely different collecting category. That distinction is one of the reasons experienced collectors examine the coin itself rather than relying on the date alone. For the ordinary 1967 circulation strike, condition is where the market begins to separate the merely old from the genuinely collectible. Circulated examples are plentiful historically, and many surviving pieces show friction across Washington's cheek and hair, flattened details on the eagle, rim wear, scratches, and the duller surfaces expected after years in commerce. The more challenging targets are mint state coins that escape circulation and retain strong original luster. In grading terms, MS60 through MS64 can describe progressively better preserved uncirculated coins, while MS65 and MS66 represent gem quality territory where marks, luster, strike, and eye appeal become increasingly important. MS67 and above enter the realm of superb preservation, where a tiny contact mark can determine whether a coin reaches the next grade. PCGS identifies MS68 as the current top certified grade for the regular 1967 quarter, demonstrating how difficult it is to find an example that meets the highest standards. This is a classic example of condition rarity. The date itself is common, but an exceptional specimen at the top of the grading scale is much harder to obtain. A collector might encounter an attractive uncirculated quarter for several dollars, or perhaps a more desirable certified gem example in the tens or low hundreds, depending on the precise grade and market. But once a coin approaches the finest certified population, competitive bidding can move dramatically higher. One documented MS67 Plus example has sold for $850, while the finest MS68 pieces have produced results ranging from roughly $3,960 to considerably more in earlier transactions. These results demonstrate why a value estimate must always be tied to a specific grade and certification, rather than simply attached to the 1967 date. The next layer of the investigation involves die varieties and unusual mint-made characteristics. Specialists have documented several varieties within the 1967 SMS population, including a double-die obverse designated FS101 and a double-die reverse designated FS801. These are fundamentally different from random damage or ordinary mechanical doubling. A true double die originates from a die that received misaligned impressions during its creation, leaving specific areas of the design duplicated in a recognizable manner. Machine doubling, by contrast, can create flat, shelf-like secondary impressions and generally does not carry the same numismatic significance. That distinction is essential because the internet is filled with photographs of 1967 quarters showing apparently doubled letters that turn out to be ordinary striking characteristics, postmint damage, or mechanical doubling. The established SMS, FS101, and FS801 varieties are legitimate areas of study, but they must be attributed from their known diagnostics rather than from vague resemblance. PCGS records the FS1 SMS double-die obverse and related CAM and DCAM versions, as well as the FS801 double-die reverse. Documented auction results show how specialization can change the market. A certified FS101 SMS example in SB68 has recorded a sale of $431, while an FS101 CAM example in SB67 brought $449. Those amounts are meaningful precisely because they concern authenticated, attributed varieties. They should never be transferred to an ordinary 1967 quarter simply because someone notices doubling under a magnifying glass. Color and surface quality add another dimension to the evaluation, particularly because clad coins can develop different appearances depending on storage and environmental exposure. A natural silver-gray surface with vibrant original luster is often preferred on an uncirculated business strike, while attractive natural tunning can sometimes appeal to specialists when it is clearly original and visually pleasing. Dark stains, chemical discoloration, scratches, fingerprints, polishing, or artificial coloration can have the opposite effect. Grading services evaluate the entire coin rather than rewarding one attractive feature in isolation. Strike quality matters because the strength of Washington's portrait and the reverse eagle can vary, and a softly struck coin should not automatically be confused with one that has simply suffered wear. Luster also needs to be examined under moving light rather than judged from a single photograph, because bright lighting can hide hairlines and contact marks. This is particularly important when evaluating coins advertised as proof-like, rare color, or high grade. A seller's description is not a grading service. If a collector believes a 1967 quarter may be unusually valuable, the safest approach is to compare it against certified reference examples, inspect the edge and surfaces under magnification, verify the weight and dimensions, and avoid cleaning it. Abrasive cleaning can permanently disturb the original surface and leave hairlines that professional graders immediately recognize. For expensive candidates, Certification through a respected grading service provides independent identification, a documented grade, and protection against many forms of accidental mishandling. It does not guarantee a future selling price, but it gives the market a reliable description of what the coin actually is. The documented auction record shows just how far the 1967 quarter can travel when exceptional quality enters the equation. For the regular circulation strike, PCGS records a remarkable $8,813 auction result for an MS-68 example sold by Heritage Auctions on January 4, 2017. That is an extraordinary number when compared with the everyday value of a circulated 1967 quarter, but the reason for the difference is precisely what makes the record important. The coin was not valuable merely because it said 1967. It represented an exceptionally high-grade survivor from a massive production run. PCGS also lists later MS-68 transactions at substantially lower levels, including a $3,960 Heritage result in 2024, illustrating an important truth about auction markets. Even coins with the same certification level can bring different prices depending on timing, appeal, bidding competition, provenance, and market conditions. The special mint set market provides another dramatic comparison. A 1967 SMS quarter with exceptional cameo contrast has reached $4,700 in a documented Heritage auction, while a DCAM example has recorded a $4,465 result. These are not prices that should be applied to an ordinary 1967 quarter found in pocket change. They belong to specialized, authenticated examples with characteristics that place them at the upper end of their respective collecting categories. A collector evaluating a coin at home should therefore think in layers. First determine whether it is genuine, then determine whether it is a normal circulation strike or SMS piece, then evaluate grade, surface quality, variety, and eye appeal, and only after those questions are answered should market value become the focus. Preserving a promising 1967 quarter is almost as important as identifying it. If the coin is loose, it should be handled by the edges rather than the obverse or reverse surfaces, and it should never be scrubbed with a cloth, rubbed with a metal polish, dipped in household chemicals, or aggressively cleaned in an attempt to make it brighter. A collector should use inert, archival quality storage materials and avoid holders containing PVC, which can leave damaging residues on coins over time. Stable temperature and humidity are preferable to repeated exposure to moisture and rapid environmental changes. If the coin appears to be a high-grade survivor, photographing it before submission or transfer can provide a useful record of its original appearance. For suspected varieties, the best preservation strategy is especially simple. Do nothing destructive before professional attribution. A genuine double die cannot be created more convincingly by polishing the surrounding area, and a damaged coin cannot be transformed into a valuable mint error through cleaning. Counterfeit awareness is equally important. A common 1967 quarter is not normally an attractive target for sophisticated counterfeiting, but once a coin is presented as an elite MS-68, rare SMS variety, or major error, authentication becomes increasingly important because the financial stakes rise. Long-term collector demand should remain strong because the issue represents a pivotal chapter in American coinage. The post-silver transition, the 1960s coin shortage, the temporary elimination of mint marks, and the unusual special mint set program all converge in a single year. The 1967 Washington quarter therefore deserves attention not because every example is rare, but because it teaches one of the central lessons of numismatics. Rarity can exist in condition, variety, format, and preservation even when the original mintage is enormous. For collectors willing to look beyond the date, the ordinary quarter becomes a gateway into the economics, technology, history, and competitive pursuit that defines serious American coin collecting. Next coin. There is something deceptively ordinary about a 1977 D Washington quarter. The date is familiar, the design is familiar, and millions of these coins passed through American commerce without anyone giving them a second thought. But place one under a strong light and begin examining it the way a professional numismatist would, and the investigation changes. The tiny D beneath the bust of Washington identifies Denver. The surfaces begin revealing how the coin survived its journey through circulation, and the quality of the strike can separate a common survivor from an unusually desirable example. The 1977 D issue is not rare simply because it is nearly 50 years old, and the overwhelming majority of examples are worth little more than their face value in ordinary circulated condition. What makes the coin interesting is the scarcity that develops at the upper end of preservation, where clean surfaces, strong luster, sharp details, and exceptional grading become increasingly difficult to find. Later, we will examine the production history behind this Denver issue, the characteristics collectors inspect first. The difference between an ordinary mint state coin and a condition rarity, and documented auction evidence showing why a handful of authenticated examples have commanded dramatically stronger prices than typical pieces. The closer we look, the more this seemingly routine quarter becomes a lesson in how modern coins acquire numismatic importance, not through age alone, but through survival, quality, scarcity, and the willingness of collectors to compete for the very best. The year 1977 placed the United States in a period of economic uncertainty that shaped everyday commerce. Inflation remained a major concern, energy prices had risen sharply after the 1970s oil shocks, and Americans were experiencing the effects of a changing economy as the nation moved through the post-bicentennial era. At the same time, the Washington Quarter had already undergone one of the most important transformations in its history. The traditional 90% silver quarter had disappeared from regular production after 1964, and the copper-nickel-clad composition introduced in 1965 had become the standard circulating alloy. By 1977, the mint was producing enormous quantities of these clad quarters to support everyday transactions, meaning the Denver facility was not creating coins primarily for collectors. It was supplying commerce. Denver struck 256,524,978 regular strike Washington quarters bearing the 1977 date, while Philadelphia produced an additional 468,556,000 without a mint mark. The Denver figure alone makes clear that this is not a scarce date in the traditional mintage sense. Yet mintage is only the first number in the investigation. What matters to a collector today is how many survive in a particular condition and how many remain attractive enough to compete at the highest levels. PCGS estimates that roughly 89.8 million 1977 D quarters survive across all grades, with an estimated 2.69 million at MS65 or better. Those numbers demonstrate an important principle. The coin can be common overall while becoming considerably more difficult when the target is a truly elite specimen. Now examine the physical object itself. The 1977 D Washington Quarter measures 24.3 millimeters in diameter and weighs 5.67 grams with a reeded edge. Its construction consists of outer layers containing 75% copper and 25% nickel bonded to a pure copper center, the same copper-nickel-clad technology that had replaced the old silver alloy. That layered structure is immediately visible along the edge, where the copper core can appear as a narrow reddish-brown line between the silvery outer layers. For an investigator, these specifications are useful because they establish a physical baseline. A supposed rarity that is significantly wrong in weight, diameter, edge construction, or metal appearance deserves scrutiny before anyone begins talking about value. The obverse features the familiar George Washington portrait originally designed by John Flanagan, facing left beneath the inscription Liberty, with In God We Trust at the sides and the date 1977 below. The reverse presents the heraldic American eagle with wings spread, surrounded by United States of America and quarter dollar, while EPLUIBUS UNUM appears above the eagle. There is no special commemorative imagery on this issue. Its historical importance comes instead from its place in the continuing Washington Quarter series and the era of post-silver American coinage. The D mint mark is particularly important because it tells us that the coin was struck at the Denver Mint. Unlike some older dates where the mint mark can dramatically alter rarity, the 1977D is a recognized regular issue with a substantial production figure. The mint mark establishes identity, but it does not, by itself, establish exceptional value. The manufacturing journey is where a collector begins to understand why two coins struck in the same year can look remarkably different decades later. The mint prepared clad planchets, fed them into high-speed presses, and used dies to transfer the Washington portrait and eagle design onto the metal under enormous pressure. In a production environment designed to manufacture hundreds of millions of coins, consistency was the goal, but absolute uniformity was impossible. Die-wear planchet quality, striking pressure, alignment, and contact between coins during handling could all influence the final appearance. A quarter could leave the Denver Mint with excellent original luster and still acquire marks before it ever reached a cash register. Coins were moved, bagged, transporting, counted, and mixed together, allowing surfaces to collide with one another. Those contact marks become especially important on modern clad quarters because the market for high-grade examples is unforgiving. A coin that appears flawless at arm's length may reveal several small abrasions across Washington's cheek or in the open fields under magnification. Collectors also examine the reverse for marks across the eagle and surrounding fields because large open areas make imperfections easier to notice. A strong strike is another advantage. Details should appear crisp rather than mushy, although strike characteristics must be distinguished from circulation wear. Once a coin has been handled in commerce, the high points of Washington's portrait and the eagle can gradually lose their original sharpness. That is why an experienced collector does not begin with a price guide. The investigation begins with the surfaces, because the surfaces tell the story of what happened to the coin after it left the press. This is also where the difference between circulated condition and mint state condition becomes decisive. A circulated 1977D quarter may show obvious friction on Washington's hair and cheek, flattened high points, rim wear, scratches, and a general loss of the original cartwheel-like luster. A genuine mint state coin, however, has not experienced circulation wear, although it can still contain manufacturing or storage marks. Professional grading generally separates uncirculated coins into grades such as MS60 through MS70, with progressively higher standards for preservation, luster, strike, and eye appeal. The difference between MS64 and MS65 can be substantial. The jump from MS65 into MS66 or MS67 can be much more difficult because the population of surviving coins becomes increasingly restricted. PCGS describes the 1977D as common below MS66, somewhat scarce at MS66, and difficult at MS67, with only a few dozen confirmed examples at that grade in its assessment. That is the heart of this coin's rarity story. The original production number is huge, but the number of coins capable of reaching the highest grades is dramatically smaller. PCGS currently lists MS67 as the condition census level for this issue and MS68 as the highest grade shown for the regular strike. A collector searching for a premium specimen therefore examines the date and mint mark first, then immediately moves to the fields and Washington's portrait, searching for contact marks that might prevent a higher grade. Luster is studied under moving light. Color is assessed for originality rather than artificial brightness. The reverse is inspected just as carefully as the obverse. At this level, even eye appeal becomes a measurable part of desirability because two coins with the same numerical grade can look very different in person. Once the coin reaches the upper mint state grades, the financial picture begins to change, but this is exactly where caution is necessary. PCGS records a relatively modest $14.95 auction result for an MS65 example, illustrating that certification alone does not transform an ordinary modern quarter into a four-figure rarity. A collector should not see a slab and assume a spectacular value. The important question is the grade inside the slab and how scarce that grade actually is. At MS66, the coin enters a much more competitive condition category, while MS67 examples are considerably harder to obtain. PCGS's current auction record for the regular 1977D quarter is $460, for an MS-67 example sold on April 16, 2023. That documented result is important precisely because it puts the coin's potential into perspective. A common circulated quarter and a top-condition certified example can occupy completely different parts of the market, but even the best-known regular strike record is nowhere near the kind of enormous prices sometimes claimed in sensational online videos. A realistic collector might encounter ordinary certified pieces at prices measured in the tens of dollars, while a genuinely exceptional example can move into the hundreds. Values around $1,100 or $1,600 would require a very specific combination of grade, certification, eye appeal, scarcity, and buyer competition. Not merely the presence of a D, the market can also change over time, so an auction result from 1 year should never be treated as a permanent price guarantee. The safest conclusion is that the 1977 D's value curve rises sharply as quality becomes scarce, but the curve is highly dependent on exactly what has been certified. The next stage of the examination is to determine whether the coin contains anything genuinely unusual. This is where experienced collectors become skeptical of dramatic claims about doubling, missing details, strange colors, or damaged rims. A true mint error must have a physical explanation consistent with the manufacturing process. Major off-center strikes, broad strikes, clips, die breaks, and other recognized striking errors can carry substantial premiums when they are unquestionably mint-made. But the existence of such error categories does not mean every unusual-looking 1977 D quarter is an error. Machine doubling can create flattened secondary images that resemble doubled lettering, while die deterioration can produce distorted details that have no special rarity. Scratches, gouges, environmental damage, and post-mint alterations are even less desirable. The same caution applies to alleged die varieties. A collector should not assign a variety attribution simply because a letter or number appears slightly wider under magnification. Established varieties require recognizable diagnostics, and where reliable attribution is unavailable, it is better to say that the evidence is inconclusive than to invent a rarity. Authentication also involves examining the mint mark, lettering, edge, weight, diameter, and overall construction. Counterfeiting a common quarter is generally less economically attractive than counterfeiting a rare coin, but altered or misrepresented pieces can still appear in the marketplace. For that reason, a supposed high-dollar error or variety deserves professional examination, especially if someone is asking hundreds or thousands of dollars. A certified MS-67 is one thing. A raw quarter described online as possibly MS-68 with a rare doubled die is an entirely different proposition. Surface preservation deserves its own investigation because modern clad quarters can be deceptive under artificial lighting. A coin may appear brilliant because it has been polished, chemically brightened, or exposed to conditions that altered its surface, yet those treatments can destroy the original texture that collectors value. Genuine mint luster tends to move across the fields as the coin is tilted beneath a light source, whereas a cleaned surface may display unnatural brightness or fine hairlines. Color should be judged in the same way. Natural tunning can develop through storage and environmental exposure, producing shades ranging from pale gold to darker gray or brown, but attractive color is not automatically proof of rarity. Artificial tunning can reduce confidence and sometimes prevent a coin from receiving a normal numerical grade. Collectors also watch for fingerprints because oils can leave permanent discoloration over time. The safest approach is remarkably simple. Do not clean the coin. Do not rub it with cloth. Use household metal polish, scrape away discoloration, or attempt chemical treatments. If the coin seems promising, handle it only by the edges and place it in an inert, archival quality holder. Avoid PVC-containing materials and uncontrolled moisture. If a specimen appears to be a high-grade candidate, professional certification can preserve its identity and protect the surfaces from unnecessary handling. The goal is not to make an old quarter look newer. It is to preserve whatever originality remains. In a market where tiny surface disturbances can determine whether a coin qualifies for MS65, MS66, or MS67. One careless cleaning can destroy the very characteristic that made the coin worth investigating. The deeper we go, the more the 1977D demonstrates why collector demand is driven by scarcity at a particular level rather than by age alone. NGC's auction database shows numerous transactions for the issue, including ordinary certified mint state examples selling for relatively small amounts, while PCGS's population and survival data show that millions of pieces remain in grades that satisfy everyday collecting needs. That abundance keeps normal examples affordable, but it does not eliminate competition for exceptional coins. A collector assembling a high-grade Washington Quarter set may need a 1977D in MS67 or better, and once several collectors want the same limited population, the market becomes competitive. This is why one might occasionally see a superb example approach or exceed $1,000 in a strong specialty market, while another coin with exactly the same date and mint mark remains worth only a small premium over face value. A hypothetical $2,300 valuation would therefore make sense only for an exceptionally certified coin with genuinely scarce characteristics and strong market demand. It would make no sense for an ordinary circulated example. Similarly, a figure such as $3,700 should never be presented as the value of a 1977D quarter without identifying the exact coin, grade, attribution, and transaction behind it. Auction records belong to individual coins. They are evidence, not promises. The most valuable lesson for a collector is to compare like with like, regular strike against regular strike, grade against grade, certified variety against certified variety, and documented sales against documented sales. That method protects collectors from inflated online asking prices and helps reveal the real structure of the market. There is a final reason this Denver quarter deserves attention. It captures an important chapter in America's transition from traditional silver coinage to modern clad money. The coin entered circulation during an era of inflation, changing consumer habits, energy uncertainty, and rapidly evolving mint technology, yet its design remained deliberately familiar. Washington still looked toward the left, the eagle still dominated the reverse, and the quarter still performed its everyday job in vending machines, cash registers, parking meters, and pockets across the country. Decades later, that ordinary circulation history is exactly what makes condition rarity so fascinating. Millions of quarters were used and worn, while a much smaller fraction escaped with extraordinary surfaces. The best 1977D examples are not valuable because the date itself is mysterious or because every coin hides a secret error. They are valuable when measurable scarcity meets exceptional quality and collector demand. A serious examination should therefore proceed methodically. Confirm the 1977 date, locate the Denver D, inspect the edge and physical specifications, study Washington's portrait and the reverse eagle, evaluate wear, search for contact marks, judge original luster and color, investigate any suspected error against established references, and obtain professional authentication when the evidence justifies it. Storage should protect the coin rather than alter it, and auction records should be interpreted as records of specific certified pieces rather than universal price tags. The ordinary 1977D Washington Quarter remains a common modern coin, but the exceptional survivor tells a much more compelling story. Somewhere between those two extremes lies the real fascination of numismatics, the discovery that value is not simply stamped into the metal. It emerges from history, manufacturing, preservation, rarity, authenticity, grading, and the intense competition of collectors who recognize something special when they see it. Next coin. The 1985 Washington Quarter is a perfect example of how an apparently ordinary piece of pocket change can conceal a much more complicated story once a collector begins looking closely. Hundreds of millions were struck at the Philadelphia Mint, and countless examples spent years moving through cash registers, vending machines, parking meters, and household coin jars. Yet among that enormous population A surprisingly small number survived with the kind of pristine surfaces, sharp strike, original luster, and exceptional preservation that modern collectors pursue. The P beneath Washington's portrait is not merely a small letter, it identifies Philadelphia and immediately tells us which production issue we are examining. But the mint mark alone does not make this quarter scarce. The real investigation begins when we ask why a date with such a massive mintage can become difficult at the highest grades, what separates a normal survivor from a condition rarity, and whether an unusual-looking example represents a genuine mint-made characteristic or simply damage that occurred decades after production. As we move through the history and physical evidence surrounding the 1985 P, we will examine the characteristics experienced numismatists inspect first, the grading thresholds that dramatically change collector interest, and documented auction results that reveal how dramatically authenticated exceptional specimens can differ from ordinary examples. The mystery is not whether every 1985 P quarter is valuable, it clearly is not, but why a tiny fraction of them can become objects of serious competition. The world that produced this quarter was very different from the one in which collectors examine it today. In 1985, the United States was emerging from the severe inflation and economic turbulence of the previous decade, while the Reagan-era economy was experiencing strong growth alongside continuing debates over interest rates, federal deficits, manufacturing, and international trade. The quarter remained one of the workhorses of American commerce, and the mint needed enormous quantities to satisfy everyday demand. Philadelphia struck 775,818,962 regular 1985 P Washington quarters, making the issue unmistakably common in terms of original production. That figure is so large that it would be easy to conclude the coin could never become scarce. But numismatics measures something more complicated than how many pieces came off the presses. PCGS estimates that approximately 271.5 million examples survive in all grades, with roughly 81.5 million surviving in MS60 or better, and an estimated 16.3 million at MS65 or better. Those numbers tell us that the date is abundant even in uncirculated condition, yet the situation changes considerably at the very top of the grading scale. PCGS's specialist commentary describes the 1985 P as very scarce in MS66 and higher, with fewer than a couple hundred examples identified in MS66 and only a handful known in MS67. This is the central paradox of the coin. The original mintage is enormous, but the population of truly elite survivors is dramatically smaller. In other words, the rare thing is not the date, it is the condition. PCGS.com https://www.pcgs.com/coinfax/coin/1985p25c/5918/63 Atom source equals chat.com. Before judging rarity, an investigator has to establish exactly what is sitting in front of the lens. The 1985 P Washington quarter has a diameter of 24.3 millimeters, a standard weight of 5.67 grams, and a reeded edge. Its metallic structure belongs to the modern clad era. Outer layers contain 75% copper and 25% nickel, bonded to a pure copper center. Turn the coin sideways, and the copper core can usually be seen as a narrow reddish line between the pale outer layers. These characteristics provide a useful authentication baseline. A suspicious coin should be checked for proper weight, diameter, edge construction, and overall design before anyone starts discussing rarity. The obverse carries John Flanagan's long-running portrait of George Washington, facing left, with Liberty surrounding the upper portion, In God We Trust on either side, and the date 1985 below. On the reverse, the heraldic eagle spreads its wings beneath United States of America, with $quarter at the bottom and EPLURIBUS UNUM above. The design had already become deeply familiar to generations of Americans by 1985, but that familiarity can actually make collectors overlook the details. Under magnification, the lettering should have the correct shapes and proportions, the rims should exhibit the expected form, and the fields should show the texture expected from a genuine struck coin. The P mint mark identifies Philadelphia, but it should never be treated as a guarantee of rarity. Instead, it establishes the coin's identity and gives the investigation its starting point. The quarter's physical appearance was determined long before it reached a collector's hands, during a manufacturing process designed around speed, precision, and enormous volume. Modern clad planchets were prepared from bonded metal strip, cut into blanks, and processed so their edges could receive the raised rim that helps the finished coin withstand circulation. Those planchets were then struck between obverse and reverse dies under tremendous pressure. At Philadelphia, thousands upon thousands of quarters had to be produced efficiently, and that industrial environment inevitably created differences in strike strength, surface quality, die condition, and planchet appearance. A freshly struck quarter could possess attractive cartwheel luster, yet it could also acquire contact marks as coins collided during handling, counting, transportation, and storage. This explains why two coins that left the same mint in the same year can look remarkably different today. Experienced collectors first examine the open fields because those areas are especially revealing. A tiny cluster of contact marks near Washington's cheek can prevent a coin from reaching a premium grade, while a clean field with uninterrupted luster can become a major asset. The reverse deserves equal attention, particularly the eagle's wings and surrounding fields where marks are easy to see. Strike quality also matters. A weakly defined detail can result from production characteristics rather than circulation wear, so the observer has to distinguish softness from actual friction. That requires comparing high points, protected recesses, and the overall texture of the coin rather than judging one design element in isolation. The more carefully the coin is examined, the clearer it becomes that preservation, not simply survival, is the foundation of high-end value. That distinction becomes crucial when grading enters the picture. A circulated 1985 P can show friction across Washington's hair and cheek, flattening on the highest portions of the eagle, rim wear, scratches, and reduced luster. A mint state coin has escaped actual circulation wear, but it can still contain numerous contact marks from the production and distribution process. Professional grading systems divide uncirculated coins into numerical levels such as MS60 through MS70, with progressively stronger expectations for surface preservation, strike, luster, and overall eye appeal. On the 1985 P, MS65 is not necessarily the end of the story. PCGS identifies MS66 as a much scarcer level and MS67 as an exceptionally difficult grade, with no examples listed higher than MS67 in its specialist commentary. That means a collector examining a supposedly superb quarter should not stop after seeing uncirculated. The critical question becomes how many distractions remain on the surfaces. Is Washington's cheek clean? Are the fields smooth? Does the original mint luster move naturally under changing light? Are there hairlines suggesting cleaning? Does the reverse display strong detail and attractive balance? Color also deserves careful attention. Natural tunning can develop over decades and may range from pale gold to gray or other hues, while artificial coloration or chemical alteration can undermine a coin's originality. The finest examples are prized because so many opportunities existed for damage before they ever reached a collector. This is why a coin with the same date, mint mark, and design can be nearly ordinary in one grade, yet dramatically more desirable only a few grading points higher. PCGS.com, https://www.pcgs.com/coinfacts/coin/1985p25c/5918/63 Atom source equals chat.com. Only after that groundwork does the market begin to make sense. Documented sales show a striking progression. A PCGS-certified 1985 P in MS63 brought only $11 at a 2008 David Lawrence RC auction, demonstrating that certification itself does not create rarity. An MS66 example sold for $77 at Great Collections in 2011, while another heritage example also illustrates the comparatively modest market for lower gem grades. But the situation changes at the condition ceiling. PCGS records an auction record of $1,528 for an MS-67 example sold by Goldberg Auctioneers on June 5, 2017. That result is important because it represents an authenticated coin at an exceptionally high grade, not the normal market value of a 1985 P quarter. A collector might therefore encounter a certified example worth only a few $dozen, while a truly scarce top-grade piece could move into four-figure territory. Depending on grade, certification, eye appeal, and competition, an exceptional coin might reasonably enter market around $1,250 or perhaps approach $2,000, but those figures should never be generalized to the entire issue. Auction results are records of individual coins under particular circumstances. They are influenced by timing, bidding competition, certification, visual quality, and the number of collectors actively seeking that exact specimen. The $1,528 record demonstrates the principle perfectly. What appears to be an ordinary modern quarter can command a substantial premium when it reaches a grade that very few survivors can achieve. PCGS.com, https://www.pcgs.com/auction prices/details/1985 PMS/5918 Utum source equals chat.com. The next stage of the investigation is where many online claims become unreliable. Errors, varieties, and unusual-looking surfaces. A genuine mint error can transform a common date into a specialized collectible, but the error must have originated during the mint's manufacturing process. Major off-center strikes, broad strikes, clips, die breaks, wrong planchet strikes, and other documented errors can be valuable when they are dramatic, authentic, and properly attributed. However, a damaged rim is not automatically a clipped planchet, a flat secondary image is not automatically a double die, and discoloration is not evidence of a rare mint composition. For the 1985 piece specifically, collectors should be especially careful not to invent a variety from ordinary mechanical doubling or post-mint damage. Reliable attribution requires established diagnostics and, for significant pieces, professional examination. Authentication should begin with the basics: correct diameter, correct weight, proper reeded edge, accurate design details, genuine mintmark style, and surfaces consistent with a struck-clad quarter. Magnification can help reveal suspicious tooling, scratches, plating problems, or artificial alterations, but magnification alone does not prove rarity. If the coin appears to represent a major error, certification by a reputable grading service can provide an independent determination of authenticity and attribution. This is particularly important when the claimed value rises into the thousands. A hypothetical $2,700 market value could only make sense for a specifically identified, authenticated, exceptional coin. It would be irresponsible to attach that figure to a raw 1985 P merely because someone noticed doubling around a letter. The discipline of saying unverified when the evidence is insufficient is one of the most important habits a serious collector can develop. There is another remarkable piece of evidence that demonstrates how dramatically an authenticated mint error can alter the story. Heritage Auctions recorded a 1985 P Washington quarter described as a multiple-struck obverse die cap, certified NGC MS-68, selling for $1,495 in January 2005. This is precisely the kind of result that must be placed in context. It was not a normal 1985 P regular strike that somehow became worth nearly $1,500 because of its date. It was a certified, unusual mint-made error with a spectacular production history, and its value came from that combination of rarity and authentication. The distinction is essential for anyone studying modern coin prices. A normal MS-66 or MS-67 should be evaluated against ordinary strike auction records, while a significant error must be compared with other authenticated examples of the same error type. That separation also explains why internet lists of rare 1985 quarters worth thousands can be misleading when they combine ordinary coins, errors, and unrelated proof issues into a single price category. For the regular 1985 P, the strongest documented PCGS result is the $1,528 MS67 sale. For the unusual multiple-struck die-cap era, the $1,495 NGC MS68 result belongs to a completely different collecting category. Exceptional examples can therefore occupy a market somewhere around $1,500, $2,300, or even higher if a truly unusual and strongly desired piece appears, but those figures are not universal values. They depend on the coin's exact identity, grade, attribution, originality, certification, and the competitive environment at the time of sale. The safest collector never asks, what is a 1985p worth? The better question is, what exactly is this 1985p, and what comparable authenticated coins have actually sold for? That question leads directly toward evidence rather than speculation. CGS.com, https://www.pcgs.com/auction prices/item/1985p25c/ 5,918/8 quintillion 195,795,787,786,273 item source equals chat.com. Preservation becomes especially important once a collector realizes how narrow the path to the highest grades can be. A coin that might have qualified for an elite grade when it left the mint can lose that potential through fingerprints, improper storage, abrasive cleaning, or careless handling decades later. The safest approach is to hold a quarter only by its edges and avoid touching the fields or portrait. Never polish a suspected valuable coin, never rub away tunning, and never use household chemicals to make the surfaces appear brighter. Such treatments can leave hairlines, alter the original surface, and reduce the coin's desirability. Archival quality holders that do not contain PVC are preferable for long-term storage, and stable environmental conditions are better than repeated exposure to moisture or dramatic temperature changes. For a coin that appears to be an MS66 or MS67 candidate, professional certification can protect the surfaces while establishing an independently documented grade. Collectors should also remember that population reports are not absolute counts of every surviving coin. The same coin can be resubmitted, populations can change, and raw examples remain outside certification databases. Nevertheless, population information combined with auction appearances provides valuable evidence about condition rarity. The long-term importance of the 1985p lies precisely in this intersection of abundance and scarcity. Nearly 776 million were struck, yet the uppermost grades are genuinely difficult. That tension gives registry collectors, Washington Quarter specialists, and condition-focused numismatists a reason to compete for exceptional survivors. And sometimes, the most revealing story is hiding in the coin that everyone else overlooked. PCGS.com, https://www.pcgs.com/coinfacts/coin/1985p25c/5918/63 item source equals chat.com. The final examination brings all the evidence together. The 1985p Washington Quarter is not a rare coin in the conventional sense, and a circulated example should not be treated as a hidden fortune simply because it has reached middle age. Its importance comes from the contrast between its enormous production and the surprisingly small number of coins that remain at the very highest levels of preservation. A serious collector begins with identity. 1985, Washington Quarter, Philadelphia P. Then comes physical verification through weight, diameter, reeded edge, and clad construction. Next comes condition, where contact marks, luster, color, strike quality, and eye appeal. Only after those questions are answered should varieties and errors be investigated. A genuine major mint error can create an entirely different market, as demonstrated by the authenticated multiple-struck die-cap example, while an elite regular strike can command a substantial premium simply because so few comparable coins exist at the top of the grading scale. Current market demand remains strongest for coins that combine certification, exceptional preservation, attractive surfaces, and scarcity at a meaningful grade. Over the long term, the quarter also preserves a small piece of American economic history. It belongs to the mature era of copper-nickel-clad coinage, when the familiar Washington design had become an everyday symbol of American commerce. Its story is therefore larger than its face value. The ordinary pieces document how Americans used money. The exceptional survivors document how carefully a few coins escaped the damage of time. And that is ultimately why the 1985 P remains worth investigating, not because every example is rare, but because an enormous population makes the discovery of a genuinely superior survivor all the more compelling. When authenticity, grade, originality, rarity, and collector competition finally converge, a familiar quarter can cross the boundary from everyday money into serious numismatic history.